Hello and welcome back to my spoiler review of 2022's The Batman. If you haven't seen the movie yet, go and check out my spoiler-free review first, but if you have, let's talk about it. So I say a lot of my more general praises of the movie in my spoiler-free review, so I don't want to reiterate them here, but if you want to know what I thought about the art direction, about the performances, etc., go and check out that review. This one, I mostly want to focus on the plot because that's what I didn't talk about at all in my spoiler-free review. The movie opens with a scene of some surveillance, and we don't know who's doing the surveilling. It's first-person perspective. So at first, I was kind of inclined to think that it was the Batman, but as it turns out, it's not. It's the Riddler. He's looking in on the mayor of Gotham that's leaving office. There's a new mayor that's coming in. He's watching the debates, and he's making some phone calls that heavily imply that the election is rigged and that he expected to see certain things happening. And then you see the Riddler infiltrate his place. I think that this is a really great scene. It's really smart, the idea that you don't know who's surveying, because it blends together the perspectives of Batman and Riddler. They both would be the kind of person who would be watching a corrupt person and wanting to mete out vengeance upon them. But when you realize what it is, you see how dark Batman's approach is, because it's really not all that different from the Riddler's. The Riddler just takes it that little step further, and instead of beating him unconscious and throwing him in jail, he beats him to death and exposes all of his corruption. Then we see the Batman. There's a subway train where there's a group of thugs that are all antagonizing people on the subway, and you can see that there's a new recruit that's going through like a hazing kind of ritual, that this new recruit needs to beat up some random guy. This scene is probably intentionally evocative of 2019's Joker, because that has some scenes of violence in a subway. It feels a lot like that. These guys are trying to get the new recruit to do it, and he's really reluctant to beat up this innocent guy. And then you see the Batman come out of the shadows. They ask him who he is, and he says, "Vengeance. I am vengeance." And then he beats them all. The guy who was going to join the gang is terrified. He actually tries to stop one of the other gang members from shooting Batman, unsuccessfully, but Batman's armor protects him. Batman doesn't beat this guy up, but he terrifies him and he runs away. And then the victim is also scared of Batman. He's like, "Please don't hurt me." Batman doesn't say anything to him, and he just walks away. And he goes back home and just looks really sad, disheartened by the state of Gotham. At this point, I might be getting some of the details wrong about this. I've only seen the movie once. I tried to look up a plot summary online, and I couldn't find a scene-by-scene breakdown, so I'm sorry if I get some of the order of this wrong or I leave out important parts. I'm doing my best from memory off one viewing of the movie. But after he goes home from the thugs, he hears about what happened with the mayor's murder, and he goes to the crime scene to investigate. A lot of the cops there are reluctant to allow Batman in. You get this one officer who's trying to hold him back, trying to be a tough guy. He's really dismissive of him, but Commissioner Gordon lets him in, working with Batman. Jeffrey Wright as Commissioner Gordon, I didn't really talk about him in my spoiler-free review, but so much of what he does in the movie is just explaining the plot of the movie. I wanted to save it for this. He gives this really great performance of a gruff but good-natured cop, which I think is a perfect fit for the Commissioner Gordon character. He's a little funny, but not too funny. He's not like a silly character, but you can tell that he has a sense of humor, and he plays off of Batman pretty well, who's very humorless. Batman makes some connections at the crime scene that ultimately get them to figure out what the Riddler was doing there. The Riddler cut off the mayor's thumb because the mayor's thumb had a USB thumb drive. It needed his thumb as a fingerprint to go in and look at some of his secret photographs and documents. The Riddler Riddler had rigged this thing up so that as soon as they go and they look at it, it would send out emails to all of the news outlets throughout the city. And I thought that was really cool. That made me laugh when he did it. I think I was the only person in the theater who laughed because of that, but I just thought that was so funny. Like, Commissioner Gordon is trying to do this investigation thing, and then he's like, oh shit, I just emailed everyone in the city all of this confidential information about the dead mayor. Oh my god. I thought that was pretty great. And Jeffrey Wright's general energy in the scene is really good. He's like, oh man, this guy's got a real sense of humor, doesn't he? With the thumb, and he has to touch the thumb and he's grossed out by it. I thought that was really cool. That's all set up, and so we know what the Riddler's overarching goals are and how Batman is an effective detective to try to stop it. He gets some help from Alfred throughout, but I know that this is something that a lot of people want to see more in Batman, seeing him being a detective, and this movie really does that. It definitely is like a mystery movie. I wouldn't say it's necessarily one that we get to play along with, but Batman is doing crime solving, putting things together. It was pretty entertaining. When they're looking at the photos, there's this mysterious woman who is with the mayor, and it's not his wife. They're like, okay, she must be some important part of this. So they go and try to find her, and that eventually leads Batman to Selina Kyle. She is hiding this woman whose name is Annika in her house. Apparently they worked together at this club. She's trying to keep her safe ever since this information went out that she's tied to the mayor, and so she's a loose end, and she's worried about getting offed by the mob because the mayor and the mob are working together. She's trying her best to lay low. As Selina and Batman both break into the mayor's house at the same time to find information on Annika, her passport is being kept in a safe because she's being held against her will by the mayor before he was killed. They end up fighting about it, but they eventually decide to work together. But it turns out when they come back home, Annika has been kidnapped and she's gone. Now Selina and Bruce are going to work together to figure out where she is, but their motives are a little different. Selina really wants to save her friend. Bruce really wants to stop the Riddler and is trying to chase this trail that will lead him to figure out who the Riddler is. One of the best scenes in the movie is when Selina wears these awesome video surveillance contacts that Batman had been using previously. It looks like he always puts these in so he can get a record of everything that he sees to help him with his investigations. He has Selina wear these while she goes into this nightclub, and it'll help him identify all the people that are involved in it and help get leads on it. And it's really cool seeing the back and forth in between the two of them, where Bruce is pushing her to do things she doesn't want to do, and you can tell how much she doesn't want to do it. But then when she switches and she's like, okay, I guess we're doing this now, I need to commit to the role, the character of Selina does really good acting. And I think that was great. It was really compelling. It was very tense. You were wondering if she was going to get found out. You get to see the underbelly of the world. The fact that this movie doesn't have an R rating holds it back here, because one of the things they must have done to get a PG-13 rating is all of the drug use in the movie is a fictional drug where they use eyedroppers to get high. The movie Looper did the same thing, and they call all the people who do it drop heads. When I was saying in the spoiler-free review that the DA Coulson looks so sad, that's what he's doing. He's doing these drugs to take the edge off of his very stressful life. It would have worked a lot better if it was a more believable drug. If they were snorting something, it would have made this thing seem a lot sketchier. This just looks like their contacts were bothering them and they were like, oh, I need to freshen up. And like, I get it. I get why they did what they did, but it didn't work as well as if you saw them acting like Tony Montana. Would have really sold the grossness of the situation a bit more. The scene ends when Selina gets a good lead on where Annika might be, and she wants to bolt and take this lead to find her, but Bruce is like, no, I don't have any leads on getting to the Riddler. I need you to stay. But she's the one who's there, so she just leaves. It really frustrates Bruce. After the DA leaves the club, the Riddler is in his car waiting for him. That was a really good scene too, because as as he gets in the car, you can see that the inside of his car is all fogged up and he has to wipe it down. And it's the kind of thing where you probably wouldn't think about it if you were in the situation, but it was so rainy, and the entire movie is rainy. It's a really rainy city. You wouldn't necessarily think about it, but you wouldn't have fog on the inside of your window if you have a nice new car and all the doors are shut and it's raining. It would still stay dry inside your car, but it wasn't, because there's a serial killer that's been hiding out in his back seat for the last couple hours, fogging up his car. So then the guy grabs him, then it cuts away and you don't see. So I don't know, the scene's really good, but it makes me wonder exactly what was going on with the framing device of the movie. For one, the movie is 100% chronological. There are no flashbacks in the movie. The only time that you get to see anything that happened previously is when you see documentation of things that happened previously. There's no flashbacks, there's no flash forwards, nothing's out of time. It seems like the vast majority of the movie is told from Bruce's perspective. We're very close to Bruce and we don't see things that Bruce doesn't see, except for a couple of these. And it makes me wonder exactly where they drew the line. Is it we're allowed to see the scene with Coulson and Riddler because Batman finds out the consequences of the scene later, and so he must have put together that this is sort of how it went down, so then we're privy to it? But at any rate, Batman doesn't know that it's happened quite yet, so the movie continues. Coulson is just missing. The next scene is the scene at the church. Bruce Wayne is going to go to the funeral of the deceased mayor. I failed to mention earlier, after Batman was investigating the crime scene, he sort of made a connection between the son of the mayor as he was leaving. He makes eye contact with him. He realizes this kid is orphaned just like he was. You can see the sadness in his eyes, but he doesn't really communicate anything to the kid. And that's going to come up in this scene where they're going to the church. Bruce Wayne is really just there because he's hoping that he'll get some intel. So that's why he's willing to make an appearance. And he sees that there are people involved in the crime family there. He's worried that Selina is there because she met with Falcone. That was her way into maybe finding out where Annika was. He sees someone who he thinks is Selina leaving the car with him. He's a little too passionate about figuring out if that's her or not. It turns out it's not her. It's just someone who looks like her if you can't see her face. But you can tell that there's some chemistry there, that he has feelings for her. He talks to Falcone and he further confirms his ideas about the mob and politicians being tied to one another. So while he's in the church, they start to give the funeral, but it gets interrupted. You can hear screaming from outside, and then Coulson's car crashes into the church. Bruce springs into action and jumps and saves the kid from getting hit. I thought that was really cool. It was a great emotional beat for him to do that act of heroism and for it to be reflexive. He didn't think about it, he just did it because he felt compassion for this kid. But then you see all the cops, they have guns on the car and they're telling him to come out. And at this point, I assumed that Coulson was dead. And I was like, oh yeah, I don't think he's gonna come out, guys. I think you're gonna find a dead body in the car. But then he does come out and he's got a bomb strapped to his neck. They clear out the church. They bring a bomb defusal unit, but that ends up not mattering too much because Bruce goes off camera, changes into the Batman, and then comes back and starts talking to him. Coulson has a phone where the Riddler makes a phone call to him. He really feels like Jigsaw from the Saw movies at this point. He starts saying, we're going to play a little game, and if you don't win, you're going to blow up, and if you don't play the game, you're going to blow up. I thought this is really cool. I like the villains doing something as insane as this and getting such a kick out of it. He really loved being in control of this situation. He gets Coulson to admit to things that are incriminating to people, but then he wants him to really spill the beans about the governmental organized crime conspiracy, and Coulson just refuses. He's like, if I confess, they're going to kill me and they're going to kill everybody that I care about. If I don't confess, the Riddler's just going to kill me, so why would I confess? So then he blows up. It knocks out Batman because he's only like a few feet away. And I thought that was a little weird, but I can sort of understand it. It didn't need to be that big of an explosion. station. It was rigged up to Coulson's neck. Even a relatively minor explosion is going to kill him and doesn't need to do much damage to the surrounding area. So it just knocks Batman back, makes him get tinnitus, and he gets knocked out, but he's more or less fine. So then Batman wakes up in the Gotham Police Department. All of the police are there and they're talking about unmasking him and charging him with all the vigilante stuff that he's been up to. Commissioner Gordon is trying to help him out and get the other guys to take it easy on him, and they're not really going for it. They're not too keen on this idea. So Gordon and Bruce decide to fake that Bruce attacks him. So he's like, I want you to punch me. Here's this key. You can leave out of the top of the building. So that's what he does. He punches him. Later you find out he's like, you could have held back on that punch a little bit. And Bruce is like, I did. And then you're like, okay, all right, tough guy. So he runs up to the top of the building and he puts on one of those flying squirrel suits and flies out of the building like that. It's scenes like this where you can tell they're really going the extra mile to make this more believable. The outfit that he had looked like the sort of thing you would expect a base jumper to have, though the way how he flies through and then rolls off the top of a bus seems like it would probably be a lot more deadly than it was, but it was still a pretty cool scene. Based on the clues that Batman got previously, he goes after the Penguin and the crime family to investigate him to find out if that's who the Riddler is going after. Maybe they can put a stop to the Riddler's killings if they can find the link between the crime family and the cops. While that's happening, Selina is coming in to rob them and try to find Annika. She finds her, but she's dead. They had killed Annika. She's pretty devastated. Batman is able to distract them enough. They end up saving each other in this big firefight. She is successful in robbing them. She gets a duffel bag full of money, but the Penguin gets away. And then you have this really intense chase where Batman has this sweet tooled up muscle car with a jet engine on the back of it, and he's just cruising through the city trying to stop the Penguin, and they end up going into opposing traffic on the freeway, and it's really intense. There's lots of great car stunts, and it goes pretty over the top, and Batman does that thing that everybody wants to do where you see one of those big trucks that are supposed to be holding cars, and he uses one of those as a ramp to go over this giant explosion of semis to fly over and catch the Penguin. When I said that there were a lot of good inverted shots, this is one of them where Penguin thinks that he got away even though he's had an accident and his car flips over a bunch of times, but he's upside down, and then he sees the Batman come through the flames and then get out of his car and slowly approach him. And as it's cutting back and forth in between their perspectives, the Batman's upright and he's looking at the car that's right side up, but then everything looking at the Batman is upside down. Really great looking shot. Batman takes him to some place out in the middle of nowhere, and he gets Gordon to come and they both interrogate him, but he ends up showing them that they're barking up the wrong tree. He's like, I'm not high up enough to know anything, so you guys are looking at the wrong person. They end up discovering that they were misinterpreting one of the clues, and it gets them to get the right idea about it, which leads them to this orphanage. When we get into the orphanage, this is where you get some more cool Gordon stuff. You see Gordon pull a gun, and Batman's like, no guns. And he's like, that's your thing, man. Like, what? And he keeps on holding up the gun. So they go in, and the set is freaking gorgeous. It's this run-down orphanage, and you have these creepy green letters with a Riddler's style where he's telling them where to go. And I was gonna say I didn't think there was any green in the movie, but then my partner Sky reminded me that yeah, there's green. I think this is the only scene in the entire movie where there's any green in it, which is just on the letters of what he writes in this place. So they go through and they find some drug-addled people that they call drop heads that are hanging out in there. Then they find this projector that's set up to show some footage from when Thomas Wayne was running for office 20 years ago, slightly before he was killed, and he sees some stuff on the wall saying sins of the father. I thought this was really cool. There's a few religious references in the movie. They sing Ave Maria so many times, and then this phrase sins of the father is tied to the biblical notion of the sin that you're born with, that is your legacy. We are all born into sin. I thought that this was really interesting. They were bringing up this concept as it relates to Bruce personally, because the Riddler is really out to get Bruce. They realize that must be his next target. As he's leaving, we get these images of Alfred finding a bomb that is sent to Bruce Wayne, ends up injuring him. Bruce isn't able to stop it in time. He pieces it together that they're going after him, but that means his butler would be the one going through his mail. He doesn't make it there in time. Alfred ends up surviving, but we don't know that at the time, and he's devastated by it. While Alfred's recovering, Bruce goes to Falcone. I said that there was a bit of humor in the movie when you see the different ways how people react to Batman and Bruce Wayne. And I failed to mention when I was talking about the church that the same cop who was stopping Batman from investigating the crime scene was also at the church, and he was stoked to see Bruce Wayne. So you could see the contrast between his opinion of Batman and his opinion of Bruce Wayne and the completely different reaction. It's pretty funny. You get the impression of how much people have worked up these ideas about these individuals they've never met before, and it's so fake because they literally have contradictory opinions about the same person. It's just different aspects of the same person. So I thought that was pretty funny. And it comes up again when you have Bruce come into the club to see Falcone. There are a couple of thugs that when he went into the club as Batman, he beat them up. And when he comes in again as Bruce Wayne, they give him the VIP treatment. They're really nice to him because they're like, oh man, this wealthy dude, we want to be nice to him. He might want to spend a bunch of money here. So I thought that was pretty funny, even as you see them with like the broken noses and everything from before. When he goes in to see Falcone, he asks him about his father because he got some more information from the Riddler. He tells him a version of his backstory. After he gets this version from Falcone, he goes back and checks in on Alfred, and Alfred gives him another version of the story that's a little bit more honest. And I feel like this is where the movie is really starting to lose steam in terms of the forward momentum of the story. I brought up earlier how the movie doesn't want to do any flashbacks, and this is where that stylistic choice painted them into a corner, because you have something like 10 minutes of just people talking and telling a very similar story to Bruce twice, just with a couple of details changed. The real story he hears from Alfred is that his mom had mental issues and he wanted to keep it a secret. There was a newspaper reporter that wanted to make the story known. Thomas Wayne didn't want it to come out. He was unable to persuade the newspaper reporter, and so he turned to the crime bosses to help him out. This is where their stories differ. Falcone is implying that Thomas knew that they were going to kill this guy and he was okay with that, and then Alfred is implying that he was hoping that they would just scare him off and maybe run him out of town, and that he didn't think they were going to kill him, but he should have known better and he regretted not knowing. It also kind of tied into Thomas and Martha's murder later on, because Alfred is under the impression that the mob families did it because of Thomas's reaction to finding out that this guy was killed, and that he didn't want that guy to be killed and he was going to come clean about it, and that's why they got killed. But Alfred isn't sure. These scenes would have worked a lot better if we could have gotten flashbacks to those earlier parts. It would have helped the movie flow a bit better. Having these two back to back, it felt very low key and low energy. This movie has already been going on for a really long time and it should be building up momentum towards the finale, and it really wasn't. These revelations are interesting, but they aren't really relevant to the overall plot. They could have been, and I'll get into that a little bit later, which would have helped these scenes fit better into the overall story, but ultimately they don't affect the Riddler's plot in any meaningful way. So these scenes really could have been done in a more interesting way, or just taken out of the movie, or at least trimmed down quite a bit. After these scenes, this is when Bruce decides that he's going to go in and bring Falcone to justice. He breaks into the place and kidnaps Falcone and brings him out to a bunch of cops that are getting ready ready to arrest him. They read him his Miranda rights, but they don't ever say what he's charged with, which seems weird. He would be like, well, what did I do? Like, you don't just throw handcuffs on somebody and you're just like, hey man, we're taking you to jail. You're a bad guy. You know why you did it. But while he's handcuffed, Falcone gets shot and you find out it's the Riddler and he sniped him, and they see him in the window and they run up and he's already gone. He ran out his fire escape. They're looking around his place, but then they get a tip from someone who saw him run away, and apparently he's at a diner down the street. He just gives himself up. And I thought there was going to be like some twist in there, like they were going to say that he had already drank some poison and he was already going to die, so it wouldn't matter that they caught him, or that he had some trap rigged up so that they were going to let him go free, or he had some reason to want to get caught so that he could be inside, like in The Dark Knight where the Joker wants to get caught so he can tell the bogus story to Batman to get Batman to go after who he thinks is Rachel Dawes, but it turns out it's actually Harvey Dent. And anyway, my point is that there isn't really much of a reason why the Riddler gives himself up. He just kind of does. And there's this cool iconography of the question mark in his coffee, but it doesn't seem to have much of a big reason behind it. Also, I know this is kind of going back early on in the movie. You did see this diner once before, and you saw this person in a Halloween mask that looked really creepy robbing the place. There were some small scenes like that looked really cool. It was a cool Halloween mask, and seeing the guy get terrified of the shadows and he ends up getting hit by a car. There were lots of little scenes like that I've probably skipped over that were pretty cool. So I just wanted to mention that this is an abbreviated version of the plot. So in another pacing issue, while the Batman is investigating the Riddler's place, and so are all the cops, and you get the impression this just happened. They sent half of the cops to apprehend the Riddler, and then the other half are remaining at the crime scene. While they're at the crime scene, they get a call from the Riddler, and he's already in Arkham Asylum. He's already in his shackles and he's in the Arkham Asylum prisoner uniform. It just feels so quick. It's weird. It was Arkham Asylum right next door to the diner or something, and did they just put him in the prisoner outfit and then let him have a phone call in like 2.5 minutes or something? It just felt very rushed. Makes me wonder if there was some scenes that were cut because the movie is so long that maybe these were supposed to be different days. Bruce was supposed to go home and then come back. Not that big of a deal. This scene with Riddler and Batman talking in between the glass, this might be the best scene of the movie. This is really cool. Riddler keeps on repeating the name Bruce Wayne over and over again. You can see the fear in his eyes because you can tell he's like, this guy's really smart. He must have put it together. He must have figured out who I am, and he's going to expose me. Everyone's going to know that Bruce Wayne is Batman, and you can tell he's terrified, but he's smart. Even though he thinks he's been found out and he's scared, he doesn't let it get the better of him. He plays it cool. Turns out Riddler is actually just saying Bruce Wayne sucks so much. I can't believe that we let him get away. And then Batman's like, wait, what do you mean we? What? I'm not working with you. And then he's like, yeah, of course you're working with me. I told you that you were supposed to bring Falcone into the light. I needed him underneath this street lamp so I could take a shot at him. Then Batman's like, what? I thought you meant like figuratively bring him into the light. You meant literally? What? Riddler keeps on saying, yeah, us, the people in Gotham that are tired of being taken advantage of, we need to become stronger. We need to become vengeful against those that have abused us. This is really where Batman starts to realize how wrong his approach was, that he was so focused on making everyone terrified of him that he ended up making the innocent terrified of him. He seemed like he was on the same level as serial killers, and he wasn't inspiring Gotham to be better. He was maybe discouraging some of the bad from being as bad as they were, but obviously not enough. enough. There were some people like the Riddler who saw Batman as an ally and as an inspiration to take their own acts of vengeance against the population, and he starts to turn against him. And you can tell that he's upset with himself for having done this, but he focuses his rage on Riddler. Riddler starts singing Ave Maria again. I was looking into this. I was trying to figure out what role does Ave Maria serve in this story besides just being this beautiful sounding song. It's another tie to that eternal sin or sin that you're born with. I believe that the prayer, I realized there's multiple versions of the song when I looked it up, and it is the prayer version of the song that they sing in the movie, that it's basically asking for Mary's blessing and her protection from sin and to absolve them. It really shows how dangerous the same idea can be in these different people's hands, because for the vast majority of people that hear that song, it makes them want to be better. They want to have a greater connection to other people and live a life that's more virtuous. But in the Riddler's mind, he sees it as, we are the downtrodden, we will be saved. We need to ask for the power to be saved from these sinful people, without recognizing himself as being sinful and thinking that the problem is with everybody else. I just thought this was really powerful and a really great scene. I feel like the movie definitely loses a lot of steam from this point. It had started to wind down, and at this point it has significantly, because now we have the culmination of the interactions between Riddler and Batman, but there's still a lot left of the movie to go. At this point, they just need to have a big action scene, and if some scene like this would have been tied into that action scene, it could have been a lot more powerful and well-paced. This felt like a strong conclusion to the movie, but we still have a lot more to go. I said earlier that Thomas and Martha's turning to the crime lords to erase this story could have been tied into the Riddler better, and this is exactly what I was thinking. The reporter who was killed, that should have been the Riddler's father. It would have made a lot of sense. He said that he was an orphan, but as far as I know, I don't think he said why he was an orphan or gave anything about his backstory. And I think it would have been great to say that his father and his mother, it would have made a lot of sense to say they were killed because they were trying to make the city better by exposing some of the darker sides of the city. Not to say that someone being mentally ill is all that dark. Again, I just feel like this could have been fleshed out a bit more to explain why Martha's mental illness was such an important thing to hide. If he would have said, Thomas and Martha Wayne had my parents killed, that's why I'm an orphan, that's why I want to do all of these things, then all of those scenes where you're finding out about this backstory end up tying more into the Riddler's plot and being more relevant. In the movie that we got, the only way that they're really relevant is insofar as Batman's orphanage made him feel slighted because he had such a hard time growing up in an orphanage, having no money, and nobody cared about him, but everybody cared about the billionaire orphan. So he had that animosity towards him, but that's really it. That's the only way that it really ties into his story, and so it feels like a pretty major diversion for what we're trying to do. After the scene with the Riddler, Batman breaks back into the Riddler's place. He does some more investigating, and he finds out just seconds before it happens, so it doesn't really matter too much that he finds out that there are bombs set up all over the city. They are going to cause dams to burst, and they are going to flood the city. This is the moment that the new mayor is being sworn in, and they're in basically the equivalent of Madison Square Garden, and that's going to have to become the center of evacuation for everybody who's getting flooded, and so people are going to go there. The Riddler has set up all of these people to have sniper rifles and break into the top of Gotham Square Garden to shoot all of these people while they're all gathered together. If that seems like a lot of information that just came out of nowhere, that's because it was. This isn't set up at all. There's no scene where someone says Gotham has seawalls because they wanted to build it out bigger, so they had to hold back the water. This this is in the middle of the city. It's a place where we go to evacuate. They tell us that, but they tell us as it's happening. When Batman's leaving the Riddler, you don't know that there's any plot of anything to happen. So it's just like, wait, why is this happening now? Batman goes to stop as much as he can, but the bombs have already gone off. All these people are coming in. He calls Gordon to warn him, and Gordon tries to tell the mayor to stay hidden, but she doesn't, and she ends up getting shot by one of the snipers, and a bunch of chaos ensues. She isn't shot fatally. She's okay, but then Batman breaks into the top and starts using all these gadgets to fight them. It looks pretty cool, but it just doesn't feel properly set up. Also, in terms of the Riddler's overarching plan, so far his thing had been, I'm going to expose people who are corrupt because they are hurting all these people in Gotham. So how does shooting a whole bunch of random people in Madison Square Garden at all tie into that? It really doesn't. It takes away from the movie a lot because you have this big climactic scene and it feels kind of pointless. Why is this happening? At one point in the fight, Batman is about to fall and potentially get killed by one of these guys. They might shoot him in the face, and then Catwoman drops down from the ceiling to save him. Again, this feels like it's out of nowhere. We don't know why she would be here. We know why she would save him. They obviously have feelings for each other, but it just feels random. I really wish that there was more to it. Right after she saves him, some other guy starts fighting her, and she's about to get killed, but he's so out of it, he's losing consciousness, and then he pulls this vial out and sticks it into a little slot in his armor where he put this little vial in that I assume has like some sort of adrenaline shot. Completely not set up. They never once mentioned this, and so when he does it, it just feels like a Deus Ex Machina. Okay, so he gets up and he starts beating this dude up, and then Gordon comes and stops him. He's like, lay off. And he didn't kill the guy, but he did pulverize him pretty well. And they take the guy's mask off, and I don't know, he might have been some dude who showed up earlier in the movie at the church. I'm thinking that's who it was because they made this point to single out this dude who was like, don't I recognize you? I think it was that guy. They ask him who he is, and he says, I am vengeance, which is the same line that Batman said when he introduced himself. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I like that he said that because it further shows that this persona that Batman's adopting is something that could easily be misinterpreted by other people, and they can do these horrible acts of senseless violence. But I do feel like it was a missed opportunity. He was this random guy. He's one of Riddler's online friends that they talk shit about Bruce Wayne with. I was thinking, how much better would it have been if it was the reluctant gang member from earlier on? If you find out that guy saw Batman be such a badass and that he ended up leaving his gang and was inspired to be more violent than that. And I was just like, man, that would have been kind of cool. You want some stuff at the very end of the movie to tie back into stuff at the very beginning, and that would have felt a little bit more satisfying. So I kind of wanted it to have been him, but I like the line that he said. After that, then Batman realizes that there's all of this electrical stuff that's falling into the water, and there's all these people that are trapped. So he jumps in and cuts the wire to save them and risks his own life. He ends up surviving, and then he goes and removes some of the rubble and saves a lot of the people. And there are these really good shots where it's looking straight down at the people, and you can see them all walking through the water, and they're just in silhouette. Looks gorgeous. So still like a very good looking part of the movie. And then it cuts to the epilogue after they save these people. You can see that they're using helicopters to take some of the injured people out of the arena, and they're keeping them safe. And you can hear his voiceover as he's talking about how he wants to help these people out. I thought it was a really good send-off. You could tell that he had really changed, and there were different points throughout the story that made him go further and further in this direction. And now at the very end, he's wanting to be this symbol of hope and just protect people as opposed to hurting those who have hurt others. It's more about having a good impact on the community than about having a bad impact on those who impact the community badly. Like, two wrongs don't make a right, that you want to be more positive. That's far superior than being negative to the negative. I thought it was a good send-off to the movie. So I think the movie kind of stuck the landing. It gave gave us this satisfying plot arc for Bruce Wayne Batman. So I really liked it, and I wouldn't say that the movie was terribly plotted, but it made the experience a lot less exciting than it would have been had it been better structured. If my opinion of the movie is going to change over time, it would get better. I would be surprised if over time if I thought the movie was worse, because it does have so much good going for it, but I really wish that they would have just figured out a way how to tie everything in together better, especially the end of the movie more satisfying. I feel like a lot of the stuff that I skipped probably could have been cut. I know this is the backdrop that I've been using, and I haven't talked about how there were 3 or 4 different scenes where Batman and Catwoman or Batman and Commissioner Gordon meet up where the bat signal is, and a lot of them dragged on a bit. And it was some beautiful shots. I mean, that's why I chose it for the backdrop, but a lot of these things could have been trimmed down, and it could have made this a lot sleeker and better of a movie. And I would I'd like to see if there are deleted scenes to this movie. I would like to see a different cut of this, and probably a shorter one, or maybe even like a cut of the movie where the movie's in 2 parts. That might make it a better experience. I feel like a little intermission could have really worked in this movie's favor. There was a lot to like about the movie. It did quite well, and it's definitely a world that I'd like to see more of, but I wish that when we find out the plan that the Riddler had all along, I wanted it to be something really mind-blowing and crazy. Just finding out that it's a bunch of snipers that are going to snipe random people, it felt very underwhelming. Like, sure, it's scary, but it didn't feel like thematically appropriate. There's a couple of movies that I feel like were heavy inspirations for this movie. They're both by David Fincher. I'd say the movie Seven and the movie Zodiac both feel like they're heavy inspirations for this. They're both mysteries, and they involve a serial killer who is trying to kill all these different people. Duh, of course, that's what serial killers do. I get the inspiration from Seven. In Seven, they find the hideout of the serial killer, and it looks a lot like the hideout of the Riddler. He's this very disturbed individual, but his plan in that movie, without spoiling Seven, his plan feels very impressive. By the end of the movie, you're like, wow, okay, so this is the entire thing he was planning on doing. This is nuts, but you can see where it really built up to that, and it feels like a very satisfying and dark and disturbing ending to it. But yeah, this is exactly what this kind of serial killer would do. His vision became a reality, and how disturbing is that? And then with Zodiac, I feel like the idea that he's using these ciphers to communicate with the cops and that he's taunting them, and the look that he uses, his outfit looks very similar to the Zodiac killer's outfit. Also, some of the bird's eye view stuff in the movie feels similar to some of the camera work in Zodiac. So I feel like these were probably heavy inspirations for this movie. And, you know, looking at both of those movies, they're both rated R. Those movies really need to be rated R. So much of those movies is really dark and disturbing. I really think that would have helped had they gone for an R rating. I don't think it's as crazy as a lot of studio executives might have thought that it would be. We shall see if any of the future movies end up being rated R, or what the reception is to some of the spin-off series that I think will be a lot more adult themed. So all in all, I think it's a really good movie, and I still recommend it. If you watched this and you didn't see it, then I'd still say go out and see it. I would just say that you might feel the 3-hour runtime, but it's a pretty movie. I guess I'll also say that it feels like it's trying to be a bit too many different things. Part of me was thinking, okay, this is going for a similar tone of Joker, but then it has these intense action scenes where you have car chases and you have intense gun shootouts and very well done fighting choreography. Then you have these emotional confessions, and it didn't all mesh together as well. They're all good in isolation, but I'm not sure that they all feel like they need to be in the same movie. I could definitely see a PG-13 version of this movie that leaned more heavily on the action and didn't have some of the more mature themes to it, and that would probably work better, but I also probably wouldn't be as impressed by it. But my ideal version of the movie would still be shorter and more to the point. It would tie in the Riddler's plan into Batman's backstory and have the Riddler and Batman seem like they're two different sides to the same coin. But all in all, yeah, I think that the movie was really good, and I do recommend it. I thought it was great, and I'd like to see more. I hope that you enjoyed the movie too. Thanks for listening to me talk about it. By the way, today's my birthday. It's 3/7 and I'm turning 37. So if you want to wish me a happy birthday, I would be very happy to receive your well wishes. This is how I spend my birthday. I talk about movies because I like doing it. I hope that you liked hearing me talk about it, and I'll be back to review some more movies for you soon. See you later.